Welcome back. Well, I'm happy to proclaim that thanks to your subscriptions, I have now passed the 100,000 mark. And I really appreciate all those faithful viewers that have kept my channel going. And through the years, I've enjoyed doing this, and I'm going to hopefully continue to do it for as long as I can. Thanks to my friend Mike, who provided the last three rifles that I was able to demonstrate. I've got a model 1873 Winchester lever action here. This particular rifle, according to the serial number, was made in 1891. So this is old. This is very old. This rifle here happens to be in very, very nice shape. The bluing is a little bit thin, but mechanically it's in perfect operating condition. This is a shooter. I can't, unfortunately I can't take you out and shoot it because there's no such thing as 3840 ammo on the scene right now. You'd be lucky if you can find any ammunition, let alone that stuff which is in limited production. It's still being made. 3840 is still being made. Now this rifle was made in three different centerfire calibers, and it was made also in 22 long rifle. The 22 long rifle did not fare well with this rifle because the mass of the rifle just did not, the size and mass of the rifle was just not popular with people who wanted to have a lightweight 22. But let me talk about the centerfire cartridges. It came in the 38 Winchester centerfire, 38 WCF, the 44 WCF, which both became known as the 3840 and the 4440 and the 3840. And it also came out in the 3220, which was a diminutive cartridge. It was the same length. This one here is this is the 38. This is the 3840. Now, ironically, it's really not 38. This is a 41 caliber bullet, and the 44 was actually a 427 diameter bullet. So they weren't that different in size. And the 3220 was the same cartridge length, but it was a smaller rim diameter. The rifle was unique in that it was the first of the Winchester line to be able to fire centerfire cartridges. In other words, these cartridges right here were no longer the rimfire design. These had a centerfire, modern centerfire ignition system. And the rifle itself was a improvement, basically an upgrading of its previous model 1866 Winchester and the model 1860 Henry rifles, which both had brass receivers, hardened brass receivers. So this rifle incorporated more modern steels, and it shared a similar action where the ejector and the lifter were both incorporated together, and they shared the same sort of breech system. This is a simple bolt that retracts back and forth. It's not a particularly strong gun by modern standards. This uses a toggle link action, which was used in previous versions. And the toggle link action, if you can picture I can't stand on my head, but if you can picture my finger, when it straightens out, that was the breech block, and when it bent, that's where it opened up. So it had there were three pins in here. I'll see if I can remember to put up a pictorial of what they look like, but it had basically that simple hinged action, which isn't much different than the hinges that you'll find on a simple music stand to hold it up on the legs. Its strength relied on three very, very small diameter pins. I think they're about 3/32 of an inch in diameter. I'm not sure exactly what the diameter is, but they're not very big. They're hardened pins, but they don't provide an awful lot of mass and strength. So cartridge pressure design was held to below 14,000 pounds per square inch. As a matter of fact, in Lyman's reloading literature, modern manuals for loading cast bullet cartridges and also for just loading centerfire cartridges, they specify that the model 1873 is in a class, what they call class 1, which must be maintained below 14,000 pounds per square inch. It's about 13,700, I believe. And the class 2, which would include the model 92 Winchester and more modern versions of this rifle, can be brought up to, I think it's about 22,000 pounds per square inch of breech pressure. Now, that's not very much. That's quite low when you consider that modern cartridges are running in the order of, the 40s, 50s, and 60s here, low 60s. So this is still, it's an old design that uses old engineering. Now let me talk a little bit about its history. The Winchester Company hailed this as the gun that won the West. Of course, it's kind of a curious thing, because when they first brought this out, they were already advertising it as the gun that won the West when it hadn't been out yet. So I think it was the Winchester rifle was acknowledged by everybody as here's my buddy, here's Benny. The Winchester rifle was acknowledged by most people at that time, owing to a lot of advertising also, that it was the gun that won the West. And by the time the 1873 Winchester came along, the West was pretty much on its way to being won. The westward expansion began long before the Civil War. Began around the beginning of the late 1700s, and by certain missionaries and things. And it was pretty well underway by the time the Civil War took place. And after the Civil War, from about the Wild West period, which is very popular in the movies, occurred from the period following the Civil War at 1865 onwards to roughly another 7 to 10 years or so after that. By the time the railroads started crisscrossing the West, railroads brought law and order because a lot of the rail companies, and of course that brought U.S. Postal Service and all the sorts of things that require security. So things started to settle down largely by the end of the 1870s. So by the time the 1873 Winchester came about, the West had pretty much been won, and I guess that period is officially goes on until about 1895. But I don't think you're going to find too many people who acknowledge that there was too much of a Wild West by the time 1895 came along. In fact, the shootout at the OK Corral, I think, in Tombstone, Arizona, I believe that was 1881. So that was probably one of the last significant Wild West stories that took place. And that was really a shootout that lasted about 30 seconds, and I think there were 3 killed in that fracas, and a couple of wounded. Doc Holliday got wounded, and Wyatt Earp, he managed to come out unscathed, and his brother Virgil was seriously wounded. But there were a lot of things that took place in the West that had nothing to do with the 1873 Winchester. Hollywood's depiction of the Wild West, very, oddly, most of the Wild West stories, the movie and TV imagery, probably takes place, they don't really state, but the imagery would take place somewhere around the period just after the Civil War, before this rifle even came out. And even if it was during the period of time when this rifle came out, but you never saw, you'd hardly ever see a model 1873. Most of the time you see a model 1892. That's the rifle that you most commonly see in most of the movie and TV depictions, is the 92, the short stroke version of the Model 94 that we're all very familiar with. The Model 94 has a drop-down toggle linkage. Let me see if I can carefully put this one down. Here's the Model 94, and naturally these guns have been cleared long before I came on here. But you can see this drop-down toggle linkage. That was a design by John Moses Browning to extend, to lengthen the stroke of that bolt so that it could incorporate longer, more modern cartridges like the 3855 and its kin, the 3030 and the 32 Special. So, but the Model 92 with a slightly shorter action and without that drop-down toggle linkage, if you watch most of the TV programs and most of the movies that depict the Western scenes, it's the Model 92 that you're going to see John Wayne carrying and things like that. One of the distinctly 1873 movies was the movie entitled 1873, and that was with Jimmy Stewart, in 1950, and he was fighting it out with his bad brother throughout the entire movie to reacquire the Model 1873 one of 1,000 that he won in a street competition. You know, there was a you'll have to see the movie sometime. It involved a competition, and everybody in town, all the marksmen in town, competed to see if they could win this one of 1,000 Model 1873 Winchesters, which was highly ornately decorated, engraved, beautiful stock wood, and they were actually hand selected by Winchester for being the most accurate of their Model 1873 Winchesters. So, and actually, as a side note, the movie producer had to go out for several months ahead of time, possibly even over a year, advertising and asking anybody who had a one of 1,000 1873 rifle, one of those ornately decorated rifles, if they could buy it for the purposes of using it in the movie production, because they were certainly no longer being produced in 1950. So the rifles that you see in that movie, I'm sure there were more than one, but the rifle that you see in that movie was 1873. Is probably one of the few movies that actually depicts correctly the era. Although, you know, the clothing that was being worn by the actors in those days were probably not consistent with the clothing that was actually being worn for the era. So I digress. Anybody who's in the cowboy shooting sport, that it's more than just shooting. It's an entire culture of understanding the history of the various themes that go on through the different parts of the Wild West and the expansion of the West. But this rifle here probably signified Winchester's entry into modern rifle making like no other rifle did, because this rifle here incorporated a centerfire cartridge, which was far more improved than the previous rimfire cartridges, although the rifle itself shares those same traits, the dropping, falling lifter and ejector, which is all incorporated in one. It had the same rather simple toggle link action, and it has a tubular magazine here. And this rifle could be had basically on special order. You could, in those days you could go to Winchester or Remington or Marlin or whomever, Savage, and you could special order whatever you wanted to. You could specify whether you wanted a short barrel carbine, whether you wanted to have a musket style with a long stock, a full-length magazine, or a shortened half-length magazine such as this. So whether the octagon barrel, the round barrel, you could have different. You could have many times different stock options. I don't think this one ever came in a pistol grip option, but some of the companies did that. Such as Marlin, and Savage, they had pistol grip options. But this was the rifle that probably propelled Winchester like no other in the industry, and really solidified its fortune. This rifle was used throughout the entire world, not just in North America and in the United States and Canada, but this rifle was found throughout the world, and actually found itself involved with some wars and battles outside of the United States involving other belligerents. So it was a gun that really became very popular. Now, you'll see here on the back end here, it's got a hole, the sliding cover here, this brass cover. That, some people think that that was designed to store extra ammo. I suppose you can. I don't know if there's any particular reason you can't, but that was designed as a cleaning rod storage, so the cleaning kit could be placed in back there. And that was one of the options that I believe that the cleaning rod was something that came standard equipment with the 4440 on it, and I believe it didn't with the 3840, but you could certainly get whatever you wanted to with these rifles, as I said before. It has this nice sliding dust cover right here, and so when Stoner put his dust cover on the AR-15, he wasn't the first one to think that one up. So this preceded John Browning. When the 1860 Henry was actually that was a production gun of what was previously known as the Henry Rifle Company. And the Henry Rifle Company was then subsequently changed by Oliver Winchester to the Winchester Company after the Civil War, I believe. Oliver Winchester was actually the largest stockholder of the Henry Rifle Company, and I believe that goes even back to the volcanic repeating arms, which was a different cartridge altogether. That was an invention of a self-contained bullet with a powder in the base and everything. So that was kind of a modernistic thing that didn't take hold. But as Oliver Winchester took over the company, he changed the name to the Winchester Repeating Arms Company, and so it went, and it stayed that way for another century. More than a century. The rifle retained much of the same component systems and looks, apart from the fact that this is a steel receiver instead of a brass receiver. So this rifle was produced well into the 1900s. I believe it was eliminated shortly. It was being made at the same time as the Model 94 and the 92, and I think it was till about 1910 or something like that. But or maybe a little bit earlier. I'm not sure. Don't quote me on that. But it was a gun that was popular for a long time, and as I think I said, this one here was made in 1891, which is truly an antique. And this is a shooter. This is a shooter, and I certainly wish I could show it to you in shooting mode. It's a gun that will safely shoot, and within the limitations of the cartridge it's not a powerful round. When we're talking about these rifles here, we're talking in velocities that are well below 2,000 feet per second. I think this rifle here, with its standard loading options, is around 11 to 1,200 feet per second with either the 4440 or the 3840. And those two cartridges were each known originally as the 44 WCF Winchester centerfire and the 38 WCF Winchester centerfire and the 3220. So those three cartridges made up its centerfire options. And that the 22 version was not a popular rifle at all. It just, obviously, it's a much larger rifle than most people who want 22s desire to carry around. So that went over like a lead balloon. But it was, and I'm sure if you can find one of those, the collector value is, I'm sure, extraordinary. So I'm not a collector and I don't know about such things, but there are so many of these variations that go on. The evolution into the Model 94 was something which John Browning brought with him when he came into the company, and he vastly modernized the action and took it away from the old Henry style that had a simple buttressed link, toggle link, to having a true block behind behind the breech right here. You can see that breech block drops down, and it secures that bolt forward. So pressures could go, basically the pressures over doubled with Browning's introduction of that sort of breech block and modernizing of the action. So, you know, from the models that succeeded the 1873, and there were a number of models that succeeded the 1873 before we even got to the 1892, and maybe I can talk about those sometime if I can. Maybe Mike has some of those variations, but it's a great rifle with a great history. It has a lot of history behind it, tremendous history. This particular rifle here, if you notice, this has full buckhorn sights. I'm not sure if you can see if that comes into focus there, but these are full buckhorn sights. These are not the easiest things to use. The actual aiming device portion is a little tiny notch down the bottom. It's not the big U-shaped buckhorn. It's the small little notch in the bottom is where you place this front bead. So it's not an easy sight to use, and that buckhorn, as I've said in previous videos, that buckhorn obscures an awful lot of bucks. You know, you can't see much target beyond that. It's easy to acquire, but after you've acquired it, you can't see anything beyond it. So it's something which was highly desirable in its era, and it brings back an awful lot of memories. It's one of the selling points that I think Winchester used throughout the years. They advertise a buckhorn rear sight, although you can see in this Model 94 the buckhorn itself was greatly reduced in height so that it was much easier to acquire, and also the notch in the bottom that takes the front bead, that became much easier to acquire, much larger. So it's an evolution, and Winchester incorporated evolutions as it went on through its entire history. So thanks for watching. Thanks for supporting my channel, and I look forward to another 100,000 before I get out of this business, or perhaps more. And I'll try to bring you more Winchester guns, but I'm also going to try to bring you some you know, more Savages, more Remingtons, more Marlins, and things like that as time goes on. So thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe, and God bless.